Do you want to know how to sell your products and services without sounding salesy? Or do you want to know how to stand out from your competition and become memorable to your dream clients? And if the answer is yes, you would love this interview.
Hi, this is Eric here, and you're listening to #HighlySoughtAfter.
My guest will share with you how to craft stories that sell and build your brand. His name is Sam Neo, a trusted advisor to well-known companies like Samsung, L'Oreal, Prudential, through his employer branding consultancy firm, People Mentality Inc., which was recognized as one of APAC's top 10 HR and employer branding consultancy firms. Sam also runs Stories of Asia, an incubator he launched to empower the Asian community to find their unique voices through storytelling. And more recently, he launched StoryBuddy, an AI-powered storytelling tool to make storytelling more accessible. So if you want to sell more and sell easily without sounding salesy, listen to this interview. Yo, Sam, thank you so much for coming to our studio.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm going to put you on a test, okay?
Okay.
If your life is a movie, what would be the title?
If my life was a movie, I'll probably call it SAM.
S-A is smart because it's Sam.
But let me explain why.
Okay,
Right?
go.
So SAM can mean a lot of things, which captures my whole journey, right? So I like to use this pun to say that, SAM stands for Slim Asian Man. So when you look at me, you can remember the Slim Asian Man over there, right? But I started off with a very simple Slim Asian Man to become someone who started a movement.
Ooh.
Yeah, right? So starting PMI, People Mentality Inc. was actually started because it was really about movement. It wasn't about business. It was about me feeling frustrated that HR was seen as a second tier function. It was seemed like a dumping ground, basically. Like I always say, so corporate example was like, you can't make it in ops, you can't make it in marketing, comms, try HR, if not you're out, kind of thing.
Gosh.
So that's where I felt that, why is my profession being seen as a second tier function? And I wanted to do more, right? So hence that was what kind of prompted me to come to corporate world, to start People Mentality Inc. to show that, hey, if someone like Sam can do something beyond what people think HR can do, the rest of HR can do better as well. That was kind of what started my entrepreneurship journey. So SAM for you, yeah.
Okay, so backstory, right? You were in HR.
Yep.
And how do you end up doing employer branding?
So I got to go back to my university days where I was studying marketing in HR. So I started wanting to do marketing like a brand manager of sort, to manage brands, manage products. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to work for companies like Nike because they were very known for all these advertisements and stuff like that. But somehow opportunity didn't come, and I chanced upon an opportunity to do an internship in a HR role, basically. That was in my second year, I believe. Sorry, third year. Then because of that, I realized that HR is a lot more purposeful than most people think. Most people assume that HR, what's your impression of HR actually?
Human resource, manage people, pay us on time.
So it's always about payroll,
Yes,
recruitment,
correct.
and things like that.
Correct.
But because of that, I realized that HR is a lot more than just all this, operational stuff. And one of my supervisors shared this with me that, why he finds it so purposeful is because every time he gives someone an opportunity, for example, let's say he's sitting on the fence, right? Should I hire, should not hire? But eventually give a go for this person. This person, 5 years down the road, for example, come back and say, hey, thank you so much back then for giving me this opportunity. And because of that, I became successful and stuff. It's a very heartwarming thing, even though it sounds really small. But I think that sense of purpose, satisfaction is something that keeps HR people going. It's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that people don't realize. But that's where the purpose is compared to, for example, marketing. No discredit to marketing folks. I'm doing marketing as well, right? A lot of things are more like fireworks kind of thing, where it's really glam, really good, but it's for the moment. Whereas I feel that HR is a bit more long-lasting. You're making an impact to someone's career, someone's life event, through the opportunity, through the engagement itself. So I think that's where it started my journey as a HR person. So why HR to employer branding? I think it was kind of by chance, where after I started my business, where I started off wanting to do everything right within HR, and I couldn't find a niche. So I started off as this millennial HR thought leader, HR consultant. Right? Because everyone comes to me, hey, you're a millennial, talk about HR. Can I invite you to talk about millennial topics, basically?
Yes.
Along the way, I realized that it's not really a topic I'm very passionate about, but because it helps get a foot in the door. So I just went with it first, right? Then I started thinking, I need to create a brand for myself that's sustainable, that's a bit more evergreen, right? Rather than like a fad. So hence, I was thinking constantly what fits my persona, what fits my skill set, what is a market need, essentially. And that's where employer branding came. from the fact that I did marketing, I did HR, combined together, it's basically HR marketing essentially, right? So that's where employer branding came, and along the way I realized that I have a strong passion for it, because I think along the way I enjoy storytelling, engaging people, helping people to tell the behind the scenes stories where people don't know what's happening, to engage people internally, externally. So that's where, long story short, the employer branding angle came after about 2.5 years or so, I would say.
So, you tease out a lot of key topics, and of course, today's interview is about storytelling, right? So, would you say that in a nutshell, employer branding, it's about promoting a company to potential candidates so that they want to join that company?
I think that's the one element of employer branding. And that's a misconception that most people think about, that employer branding is just external facing, it's just for hiring.
That's right.
So employer branding actually is both inside and outside. It actually starts inside. Typically when I tell my clients, right, it's an inside out approach where first and foremost, do your employees believe in your brand first? Do they believe that this is an authentic brand that they're proud of, to then want to advocate on your behalf? Right? Without which, if you just focus on external, what happens is that, in I think it's Hokkien, right? We say picha lobang, right? Right? So
Okay, let's explain. Picha lobang means like the cat is let out of the bag when people realize you're not what you say you are.
Essentially, yeah, right? So typically you see, right, in a corporate setting, right, why do employees leave an organization in a very short period of time, let's say 3 months, 6 months, even a year, for example? That's because, right, the expectation is really high from an employer branding perspective. You oversell them. When they come in, what they see, the reality itself is much lower.
That's right.
That gap is essentially the frustration point where it leads to people leaving the company. So hence, when you talk about employer branding, both internally and externally, it has to be able to be delivered by the organization, and it has to be authentic. So it doesn't have to be perfect, unlike what most people think, but it has to be authentic, has to be something you're able to deliver, has to be consistent. All these things are very important, because we all know, right, for brand itself, it's so difficult to build. It takes months, it takes years, even decades to build. But one moment, one bad review on Glassdoor, social media, one person spreading very loudly about the brand itself can destroy the brand overnight, and it takes a lot of effort to salvage the brand. So that's why employer branding is not just external but also internally, and it starts internally, in my opinion.
Got it. Okay, so why not let's dive straight into today's topic, right? So first of all, we talk about branding. Like, what's your definition of a brand?
For me, I guess there's a lot of definition, right? But for me, essentially, it's about the trust. Do people trust this person, this product, this company, right? At the core of it, to me, is trust. Whether it's personal brand, employer brand, corporate brand. Because if I don't trust your brand, there's no way I'm going to engage you. There's no way I'm going to even give you a chance, right, for me to listen to what you have.
I love that. So brand equals trust, right? Now, then the question is, how does storytelling plays a big part in creating trust towards a brand?
I would say storytelling, essentially, to me, it creates the emotional aspect of that trust element, right? So very often when we talk about facts, let's say about employer branding, we create the trust from a very objective standpoint, rational standpoint, that I'm a subject matter expert. But if everyone is a subject matter expert, right, how do you stand out?
Exactly.
It's then when you bring a bit of storytelling to kind of frame the message in a different way, to trigger certain emotions that people can relate to.
Got it. So what I'm hearing from you is that storytelling bring out the emotional aspect of the trust. And we all know this, emotions are powerful, right? It actually drives decision making. So would you give us maybe 2 examples? Okay, one, let's give a corporate example, and then after that we give a personal example, because there are 2 groups of people listening to you right now. There are the the corporate leaders and agency leaders as well. Right, that means they're trying to build their own brand for their agencies. Okay, but we also have individuals like myself and entrepreneurs. So maybe we start with corporate. What would be a good corporate example of a good story well told?
I think corporate examples you can always think about from a CSR angle, right? Typically, corporates love to use that angle where it's about giving back. It's about purpose. It's about beyond that P&L. So in particular, you realize that a lot of corporates in the spaces that are detrimental to environment, for example, your tobacco, let's say oil and gas and stuff like that, typically they do a lot of things in the CSR space, corporate social responsibility space, because they want to show that, despite they do all this, they try to give back to the society, the community itself, and that's a way to kind of soften the damage, essentially, right? So that's one way they can tell a story using that softer element, the element that may not be directly related to their work scope, but tying back to the brand identity. Okay. That despite me supposedly doing things that are harmful, right, I'm still doing good to offset to compensate, and this is
But
this is
really,
highlighted in
but
some sense, you see.
Does it work?
I guess increasing, okay, in the past, I think it helps in some
Okay.
sense because CSR wasn't a big thing.
Yes.
Increasingly, when the level playing field is now kind of equalized,
Yeah.
people are starting to see through this a little bit more, whether or not you're authentic, whether or not it's true.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is to kind of use CSR as just a marketing tool, right?
Absolutely,
And as
absolutely.
you said, that it might backfire.
Yep, yep.
So how do we make sure that we're not seen that way?
I think it really goes with the fact that, how do you work with your employees as advocates for all this storytelling, right? Because storytelling doesn't have to just come from one person or one specific department. Most people assume that for corporate, stories have to come from corporate comms. It has to be sensitized. It have to be crafted very beautifully, perfectly. It works in the past. But in these days, when we look at social media, look at corporate messages, people don't really like such things. It's more for your corporate reporting typically. What has worked really, really well these days when I work with clients is that you talk about brand advocacy, talk about employee advocates essentially. These are people that truly believe and embody your message, that are out there being your spokesperson. I mean, you can really tell, right? From a corporate comms perspective, it's like very rounded, very nicely sounded essentially. But from employee point of view, it may sound a bit more raw, but you can feel the emotions. You can feel whether or not they truly believe in what the company is doing. And that's why it's so powerful from one perspective, the emotion perspective. The other perspective, then imagine, is it more powerful for one person to tell a story from a corporate comms perspective? Or is it more powerful, right, to have multiple people across the organization, even outside the organization, telling your story? So obviously you want to have brand advocates. You want people to tell your story on your behalf, so it becomes it's more trustworthy, it becomes more authentic, and it becomes more relatable essentially.
Got it. So let me see if I understand where you're going. So we're talking about corporate storytelling,
Yep.
right? That we're trying to tell stories so that we can get our candidates to be emotionally connected to our company. And one traditional way that we do that is by saying, look, they are all the people that we help. All right, we are doing a lot of good work for the society. But we both agree that if you overdo this, it just seemed like a marketing tool.
Yep.
So the better thing to do is, rather than have Corpcom tell that story of a company, we want all our employees to be able to tell the story of the company. It's like word of mouth marketing, right? Okay, so now let's dive deeper into
Maybe I'll
that.
just add on to that point first,
Yeah.
right? So typically what we can consider doing is that comms can still play a role, or even HR play a role to shape the overall messaging. So for example, the key value proposition to external stakeholders is, let's say we have a family culture, we believe in a learning culture, we have a growth opportunity, for example, right? So what you do is you give them a broad frame to say these are main topics or main things we want to advocate about. And employees then use their own lens to interpret, to then share their personal stories to make this powerful and more rounded.
So in other words, the company will set the direction of the message, that what do we want people to remember us by. And then our employees would then tell personal stories to reinforce that it's true.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
let's try, let's give an example, okay? Because let's say we're running an agency. There's a lot of people listening to us. They are entrepreneurs. They are from the insurance, real estate, or network marketing businesses. So they have 50, 100, 200 agents under them.
Okay.
So we need to help them craft an agency brand story first, right? Yeah. What's the process that you go through to help them identify that story?
I would say it all starts from having that clarity, right? So from an employee branding perspective, we always talk about EVP, employee value proposition, right? So why is it important? Is because first and foremost, you need to do a stock take to understand what are your strengths, what can you actually offer first. Because most people start from a point where I just want to blast on social media, right? Just like anyone else, to ensure that I have a voice out there. But having a voice that's not clear creates confusion, becomes a noise, and doesn't attract the right people to you essentially. Right? Because essentially what you're trying to attract is not just the best talent, but the best fit talent. That one is really, really important.
Yep.
So typically what we consider is then first and foremost look inwards to identify, have a clarity in terms of what your EVP is first, right? So that's usually a process where you do a bit of a basic audit, talking to employees, getting some external survey, internal survey, to extract a little bit of the key highlights. So for example, like I said, it can be a learning culture, it can be great managers, it can be, let's say, flexible working hours that people typically like, right? The next step we can then think about, so based on the context that we have, internally and externally, right? How do I frame all these keywords, all this interpretation to make sense to the target audience? So let's say we talk about learning culture. Internally, that's something people like. How do we amplify it? Showing more stories, more examples, right? To showcase that there's really a strong learning culture. So constantly, people get reminded that the learning culture is something that I really value. I mean, it's human nature that we always complain about things that don't work out.
Yep.
Right. Back in my previous company, it was really good in terms of benefits, but people always complain about the small items, right?
Yep.
Why do we not have this? Why is the aircon too cold and stuff like that?
Yep.
But people don't leave. Why? Because there's a lot more better stuff happening, right?
Yep.
And people often forget about good stuff until you nudge them as and when there's an opportunity, there's a touch point essentially to remind them of all these good things that's happening. So that's one internally, right? Externally is then understanding the different personas of your target audience. So for example, let's say I'm looking at tech people. The way tech people look for a job opportunity versus, let's say, a salesperson is very different. A salesperson, first and foremost, obviously, I'll look at whether or not I have the opportunity to earn more money, right? The sales incentives and stuff like that. Tech people look for exciting projects that they can work on, right? So it's a little bit different. I mean, in a very simplistic setting itself, right? So how you frame that learning culture will be very, very different. So for example, for the salesperson, a learning culture would then say that, okay, we constantly help you become a better salesperson to constantly, improve your target hitting, improve your sales ability, and with all these success stories through the learning culture, this is where this person became from a C to A player, for example, right? So that's one example. From a tech perspective, is that we have people who started as a very basic tech developer who can, let's say, only do the back end development, but because of learning culture, he could eventually do the front end. He became a leader within the tech team itself and created a product that was a award-winning product, for example, right? So you got to frame it in a way where it makes sense.
I love it.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it from recruitment point of view, but we can also then look at it from a sales point of view,
Absolutely.
Business marketing point of view, that if my company culture is growth-oriented, learning-oriented, then I can now tell my clients that, hey, we are constantly growing as a company, which means that our ideas will always be innovative and will always be ahead of the trend. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and essentially just to add on to Eric's point, right, is that when you think of a brand, right, most people segregate your personal brand, employer brand, corporate brand all separately.
Yeah.
Right? So like Corpcoms, let's say, does corporate brand, HR does employer brand, and individuals manage their personal brand. But it's wrong, right? Because essentially a brand is a brand, right? Think about this, right? Recently, there's the AirAsia saga, where the Thai CEO was throwing the F-bomb on the employee in the private town hall, and it was blasted across social media.
Oops.
Because of that, you see a lot of sentiments that people say, hey, I'm no longer going to fly AirAsia and stuff like that. But that was employer-related stuff. How did it go to the commercial company side, right? It's because it's closely tied. It's a brand, right? If you don't like a brand from an employer side, likelihood is that you no longer like the products, at least for the time being, right? That's the initial emotions that is triggered. If you don't like, let's say, a specific telco that I shall not name, right, for example, chances are, if there's a job opening there, you tell your kid, you tell your friends, don't join. This company sucks.
Because
right?
I don't like the product, and therefore I don't want you to join the company.
Precisely. There's a bad association, right?
Oh my God. So that trust triangle is there, right? Which is the company, the products, and the employees.
Absolutely.
It's all related.
Yes.
And keyword that joins all of them together is, how do I feel whenever I think about that brand, right? And now what I've learned from you is when it comes to communicating our... being able to craft stories, step number one is, first of all, know your authentic strengths, right? And so best is to ask your employees what those are, and then be able to find good examples to share it with the different target market. Now, technical question.
Sure.
We're going to do that through storytelling, right? Now, first of all, what makes a good story?
I'll say a good story is able to capture your attention throughout the entire story and also evokes emotion. I think the difference between a story and a regular passage that you read, right, is that a regular passage is just very technical, it's just dry, which is why we don't like to read textbooks typically, right? We like to read comics, we like to watch movies.
Yeah.
Because it evokes emotions, it makes you excited, makes you sad, makes you frustrated even. So I think the key difference between a story and anything else that's plain is really about the emotions that it triggers, that connects with you, that you feel that you're part of it, right? I think a good storyteller is able to bring someone on a journey where it's not just telling their personal story, but bring you through a journey where, through my lens, you can see yourself, and you really feel that someone understands me. That is very important, actually, when it comes to storytelling.
Okay, so is there a structure that we can follow? Let's say for a company's point of view, like the company's trying to tell is story. Maybe, again, let's go back to growth and learning, right?
Sure.
Maybe that's the unique selling point.
Okay.
So how would you coach that guy to tell a good story about its learning culture?
Okay, let's assume we're trying to frame this to a salesperson, right? Let's say, right, how do I sell this role to this salesperson? I think first and foremost, we start off with what we call a story gap. A story gap essentially is like a pinpoint, it's like a purpose, what's bothering the individual. So for example, that salesperson is constantly not hitting target or doesn't know where to start, right? So you can start off the story by asking the person, what if, there's a place where it can help you grow safely to become a better salesperson and eventually hit your target that you can provide, great things for your family to provide for them, essentially the comfortable life, right? Essentially addressing a few things, right? One is then you're telling him or her that you can solve a problem that's bothering that person very strongly. Second thing is that you're giving the person hope as well, right? Painting a end goal that, imagine if you do well, this is what you can provide for your family or even for yourself. The next part is then you can go into what we call context setting or building up to the story itself, right? So the first one, the story gap, something like a hook. How do you capture the attention? How do you make them bite? So the what's in it for them has to be very, very strong. That's
for them to want to listen to that story.
Absolutely. That's the first part. Because failing which, I'll just zone out, I won't be interested, it's okay, I'll just pass, kind of thing, right? So that's the first part. So the next part is then you got to substantiate a point because now you set expectations high already, right? The story gap is essentially, in Chinese we call 吊你的胃口, tease you, right? Tease you, make you feel like, it's something I really want to find out more, right? So the next part is how do you then build up, how do you set the context, how do you give more examples to substantiate that promise, essentially. So it can be in terms of, okay, this is what we have, right? For example, you can share a story of how person A from the past developed to person to this 2.0 version that I always talk about. So let's say Eric used to be a very shy guy. He used to be unable to sell anything for 3 consecutive months. But because of learning culture, he had a good mentor that guided him, that sheltered him. And guess what? Now he's a top sales after just 2 years, for example. How did he go through this whole process? It was through A, B, C, D. And that's like the build up, that's the context, that's essentially the whole gist you're trying to sell to the person, right? And finally, the last step is then how do you have that call to action?
Correct.
Why? Because you can have a best hook to capture attention. You can build up to convince the person, but if you don't tell them exactly what you want them to do,
that was the point of the story, right?
There's no action happening, right? It's just a feel good, like, okay, thank you, I feel good, I feel inspired, but that's about it. So at the end of it, you need to let them know what you want them to do, right? So essentially, is it about joining me, right? Let's make this happen together. I think at the end of it, typically, one of the ways that I always believe in is about how do you create that hope, that inspiration for people. I think in today's day and age with social media, there's a lot of negativity involved, right? There's a lot of, people trolling each other, a lot of negative comments, like Olympics, for example, right? Joseph Schooling, or even people getting bronze, getting, shamed and stuff like that. So I think people are looking for positive energy, right? So how do you constantly create an inspiration for them? How do you give them that positive vibes that, okay, this is a place that I see some hope. And if I join this place, I feel that I will be someone positive, I can do good things. Not just for myself, but if you can make it, frame it in a way where it's also for others. That's a plus point essentially. So if I can have 3 basic steps, right? First is create a story gap. Second part is how do you build up to the whole story to substantiate the story gap. And finally, a call to action. 3 simple steps I can consider.
Fantastic. Wow, that was a lot to take, and it's really good stuff. So far we have covered a lot about employer branding and recruitment, right? That means how do you use stories to get a potential candidate to come and join us as a company. Now let's move into sales.
Okay.
How do stories play a part in sales?
I love to share this simple example about myself, right?
Sure.
Because since I started my journey about 4 years ago, I became essentially like a salesperson as well, as an entrepreneur, right?
That's right, yeah.
So this story I always love to share is that in my first few years, even until now, I don't actively sell any services. I always focus on giving value, telling my stories about who I am, my journey, and basically thought leadership essentially on social media. And what happened was, one day, right, I decided to just ping one of my followers. His name is Sean. He's a good friend of mine from Under Armour. So recently he just moved to Hong Kong. He got promoted. So back then when he was still in Singapore, what happened was I reached out to him just to say, okay, thank you for supporting me, and if you'd like to catch up with coffee, let's catch up. There was no specific agenda to sell anything, but it's just like meeting a like-minded friend, someone who has been supporting me. Let's catch up. Within an hour, he replied. He said, let's catch up next week. So what happened was, a week later, we met at his office cafe, was downstairs at Suntec. We catch up. The first thing he said was, Sam, typically, right, when a service provider or vendor texts me or drop me a message, I usually just ignore. But you're different. So even though you are now a service provider, it's different because it seems like I know you for a long time already.
Why? Why does he say that? Why does he say that he knows you for a long time?
He has been following me for social media for probably about a year. He has seen my growth, my journey, my thoughts, and he felt that we could connect. So that was a big part where he accepted my so-called invitation, right, to kind of meet up. And over the next 30 minutes or so, we chatted, just like we're old friends. Like, I know this about you, I heard about this, just chat a little bit. And about 40 minutes later, he asked me this question. Sam, can you tell me a bit more about what do you do and how can I help you?
How can you help him or how?
He helped me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at that point of time, I was thinking like, okay, typically I don't, typically Asians, we feel very shy. We don't like to ask for favors. But I think there's a good value in asking for things as well,
Exactly.
right? So I just said that at that point of time, I was struggling. So Stories of Asia, what happened was, that was about 2 to 3 months before Stories of Asia is going to be launched. That was probably somewhere in April, May or so, 2 years ago.
Very quickly, tell us what Story of Asia.
Stories of Asia is a storytelling incubator that I created, right, to help people find their voice, through storytelling.
Okay, got it.
Right,
To,
so that's
to
a
find
community.
to be able to communicate their own personal brand.
Essentially.
Okay, got
and
it.
for corporates to find a corporate brand, essentially.
Fantastic. Okay.
So back then, SOA was about to launch in about 2 to 3 months' time. We actually had a big corporate partner, global MNC, which I shall not name, that agreed to be our launch partner. So we're supposed to launch at the office. Back then, before COVID, we can launch there, right? They ghosted on us.
Oh.
It was damn scary because it's like, I emailed, I called, I texted, totally no reply.
Big global brand.
Yes. And I was panicking because without a launch partner, it's going to look really bad, right? How do we launch it? So I told Sean about the situation. Immediately, he said, let's do this together.
Oh.
Yeah. So long story short, because of that, we were able to launch, SOA very successfully. I think it was about 50 private guests because we launched it at their retail store. It was pretty cool, right? And I called him my knight in Under Armour. So that was the overused joke that I used for quite a while back then. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Knight in Under Armour.
Yeah.
You
so
love it too,
he
right?
loved it too, yeah.
Got it. So now, what you just shared with us is a story, a success story of actually it's a demonstration of a good story, right? You set up the problem, which is you were struggling at SOA, and your end goal was to be successful, and you show us the whole journey of how you were able to patch the gap through somebody who helped you, right? A knight in Under Armour.
Yep.
Okay. Now, so I'm gonna break down this whole entire learning. Okay.
Sure.
The reason why a high-ranking officer in a big global brand is willing to help you is because he said that I felt like I've already known you. Because he has been following you so much on social media. He followed your journey, he followed your thoughts. So tell us, what have you done right on social media to be able to earn his trust that he will be able to come and help you?
I think the first thing is really about not selling
On social media.
on social media. Not selling a product, not selling services, right? I think that is one part that created a strong brand for me, where I attracted a lot of like-minded people to me, right? What I was selling was about my ideology, was about my values, was about my beliefs essentially, right? Who Sam Neo stands for, right? So because of that, he got attracted to me, he believed in who I am, we kind of connected, and that opened up opportunities to have further conversation. Because imagine if I started just selling, okay, I do consulting service, this service is important and stuff like that. It's a straight turn off essentially. It's just an advertisement.
Yeah, you're selling a product and service.
Yeah. And it's cold, it doesn't connect people emotionally. Probably the only emotion is frustration, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Like seeing too much frustration, right? But other than that, it doesn't create that positive energy, that positive emotion that you want. I mean, think of it as branding and storytelling is just like dating, right? You need to create a positive energy. Someone needs to like you first, to trust you that you are a decent person before we have a second date, third date, and eventually talk about getting married or whatever it is. So likewise on social media as well, what has worked is that being myself, that's one, right? Not selling anything, and also taking the effort to take the relationship online to offline. I think that's something that a lot of people miss, where they focus only on building their brand online, having followers, having all that clicks, all that likes, that shares, but they forget about that human connection. I think one interesting thing to think about is social media, right? It's supposed to be social. It's not supposed to be one way. It's supposed to be a platform for us to connect, to build relationships, and not just for us to self-promote.
Yes.
I think it's become a platform for most people to self-promote only, without thinking about how can I connect further, how can I use this as an opportunity to know that person better even. It's not all about yourself. A good brand starts from understanding who the audience is and giving the value to the person instead of just self-promoting. I think that's a very common mistake. That's a big pain point actually.
Okay, so now you have teased out two very important strategies. Okay, step number one is you said that you use social media to tell the world about what Sam is all about, right? And then step number two is you must turn an online connection to an offline connection. Okay, so we're going to cover these two things. Okay, so imagine someone listening to us right now wants to build his personal brand or her personal brand on a social media platform. Okay, what would be a framework you can give him so that he can introduce himself or herself into the social media world? Because you bring out some keywords, ideologies, thoughts, values. Walk us through the process.
I think similar, right? Personal brand, employer brand, it starts from having that clarity, right? So instead of just going social media, try and blast every single thing or try and copy every single one out there, it's not going to help. It starts from having that personal audit. So employer branding side, you have that employer branding audit. personal branding wise, have a personal audit. Usually what I do from a coaching perspective, I start from this simple framework called VISA with a double A.
Okay, Visa double A. Come,
Right?
tell us what
so
is it.
V stands for values, right? What is really important to you? What do you not want to compromise no matter what? That's the first thing you think about. That's V. I is actually interest. What motivates you on day-to-day basis that keeps you going and something that you're passionate about, right? S is actually strengths. What comes naturally to you? What are you good at doing? What do people normally say? Hey, Eric, you're very good at doing this, for example, right? So that's your strength. How do you play to your strength? First A is then aspiration. So aspiration is not a typical HR question, right? Where do you see yourself in 10 years, right? But rather, if you just close your eyes and visualize today, right? What does success look like? What do you see? Do you see like, you relaxing on the beach? Do you see yourself having a happy family? Do you see yourself being financially independent? What is it, right? So that's what success means, and that's the aspirational aspect of it. Finally, A is then once you have your aspirations, once you have your VIS, what's the action plan? How do you get there? Right? And the getting there part will then help you decipher, what are some content you can create? What are some bite-sized things you can talk about to slowly build up the journey towards there? So I think, all these are a starting point to give you a clarity, right? Because typically what people think of is, okay, my end goal is, let's say I want to be a CEO by 40, for example. Within 1 year, I'm not getting closer to a CEO. I feel like I'm a failure. I did nothing. There's nothing I can talk about. But if you have this VISAA, right, and you can break it down into smaller, what we call career building blocks. So for example, to become a CEO, what do I need? I need to be, let's say, a good public speaker. I need to have good financial acumen. I need to have good people relationship skills, for example. These are small building blocks, and these are things that help you achieve in a shorter time and let you see that you're actually progressing closer to your goal, essentially. So with that, you actually feel that I'm getting closer and closer to my end goal, the aspiration part. You feel good about yourself, and that's where constantly you have different stories you can tell on your journey itself.
Oh my God! My bugging question was, wait, you're asking a self audit, but how do we communicate it? Values is easy,
Yep.
right? Once you're very certain on what you stand for,
Yep.
you can communicate it through your day-to-day experiences, right? Interests, also very simple. Strengths as well. But I was actually puzzled about the A. Like, how do I communicate aspiration? So we don't really communicate aspiration. We communicate the journey towards our aspirations.
I guess to some extent, you can also communicate your aspiration in terms of what's my vision, right? For example, like SOA is about creating, a platform for the Asian community to have a voice, right? To unlock opportunities, for example. That's the vision, for example,
Correct.
right? But how do I get there is constantly through things that I do. So like you said, we can document the journey to see how we're getting closer to the aspiration, but we can constantly remind people what the aspiration point is, because when you have that big goal, that big aspiration itself, it actually attracts like-minded people. I think that's the power of brand, right? Where you have something bigger than yourself, something that's bigger than what you do essentially at this moment. It attracts like-minded people.
Okay, so I'm going to again put you to a test, okay? And this is really powerful because what I've learned from you right now is the self-audit, right? And actually at the core of personal branding is self-awareness,
Yep.
right? So now, let's try, okay? So say for example, my value is I value growth, okay? Now, how do I communicate that on a social media platform?
So you can show things that through your content, right? You can constantly show things that promotes growth. For example, today I'm picking up podcasts, right? So that's one thing that a new skill I'm picking up for this year. That's part of growth, right? Or within even the podcast space, for example, I've learned something from my new guest today, Sam, for example, or someone else that, it's a new point that adds on to my skill set, my toolkit, essentially. That is growth, right? So essentially, you have a core topic of growth, but you can use different walks of life, different inspirations across the different touch points in your life to bring out that growth element.
Which means that once I get clear of my value, I just need to look for evidence around me to be able to communicate that particular value.
Yes.
So like if it's growth, then I look for evidence that have I grown? If I've grown, I'll share what is my growth journey.
Or how did I grow, right? Essentially.
Or how have I grown? Or if I read an article in my process of growing and I think this is interesting for others, I share that too, and that will bring other growth-oriented people to me.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
what about interest? Let's say my interest is something very random. I'm very interested in hiking, which is not work-related. How would you put that on social media?
So typically, it goes back to analogy, right? So let's say hiking. Well, what are some things you can learn from hiking that applies to your personal life? For example, determination. You get tired along the way, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So you need to kind of, push through and stuff like that. Or as an entrepreneur, sometimes you can't just keep climbing, right? You need to take breaks as well. Water breaks, pee breaks, whatever break it is. Similar, right? And how do you, along the journey from the base camp, for example, all the way to the peak, there is that personal growth, that personal realization, right? What did I learn about myself? Did I learn that I can actually do more than what I expected? Did I learn more about what friendship is all about? They'll learn about what determination actually means, for example. All this is part of growth, actually.
Okay, fantastic. Let's say S, which is strengths,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So let's say one of my strengths is I love connecting with people. Like I'm good at connecting with people. How do we communicate that strength on social media?
So one very simple way is then, through connecting with different people, like let's say two of us, right? I've learned something from you, for example. That is one thing that you constantly talk about, because if your strength is about connecting people, your content can constantly talk about how you connect different like-minded people.
Oh my
And share
God.
their stories even. So
Yeah.
personal branding or even branding itself is not always about shining a light on yourself. In fact, the powerful part is about how you shine a light on others. That becomes very valuable, actually.
That's beautiful. And then the last one, if let's say my aspiration is, I wanna be a person of influence, right? And you said action plan. So part of my action plan to be a person of influence is, meeting other people who are already people of influence. So how do I translate that on social?
Actually, before we go there, right, I'll then ask this person, right, why do you want to be a person of influence?
Which is how you communicate your aspiration, which is the why you want it. Got it. And every step of the way where I am there, I can share. Or I'm not there, I can share what I've learned.
Because what we learn, right, along the
Yes.
way when I do all this coaching, consulting, is that a lot of times people tell you they want to be person of influence, a CEO, for example.
That's
but
right.
that's not really the thing that they really want. There's an underlying reason.
Yeah.
So
And
for
that's-
example, right, like you said, a CEO could be because you want to be person of influence. Why? Because you want to create bigger impact.
Yes.
Why? Because creating more impact, you feel that you feel proud of yourself. Why do you want to feel proud of yourself? Because you want your family to feel proud of yourself, right? So essentially, we talk about the 5 whys, right? After every answer, you ask a why.
Yeah.
You probably can decipher a little bit at the core of it what the true value, what the true aspiration is, as a result of becoming a CEO, becoming a person of influence.
And I mean, through this exercise, I saw the pattern. I saw the main common theme, which is the minute we identify our visa, all we need to do is leverage on stories to communicate every aspect of that.
Precisely.
And that itself is already our content strategy, whether is it for a company or whether is it for a individual brand. Okay, so we cover a very big part, right? Now, let's say I do that on a consistent basis and constantly adding the people that I want to connect with. My next step now is, you said this, how do we turn
Yep.
that connection, that online connection, to an offline connection?
So typically what I do is I always observe, right, people that, have been supporting me, people that engaging me, whether or not they're potential clients or not,
Yeah.
for example. So I'll just drop them a message to thank them. And I always make a conscious effort as much as possible to reply every single comment as much as possible, right? To then just at the very least thank them, and drop private messages to those who have been really following me or supporting me in different ways to just connect further. I think these are good ways to actually further the relationship. So that's one thing. So the other thing is then when you bring it offline, whether it's a Zoom call in today's day and age or actually a coffee chat, focus on not selling. I think the tendency is, as a salesperson, typically you want to sell
Yeah,
something.
I have a product to sell, a service to sell.
Very eager to come from a mouth, right?
Exactly.
But it's very difficult. So
Exactly.
I think my advice to even my team as well is typically in the first meeting, just focus on getting to know the person better and trying to build a likability.
Okay, so you mentioned 2 things. Walk us through how. So number 1, how do you make a person like you?
I think by showing that you care for that person, by showing that you actually care about what the person stands for, that's very important. So don't go in a meeting trying to tell the person everything about yourself. Go in as an active listener. I think that's very important, right? You listen more than you speak. That's where people always say, we had a very good conversation.
So be genuinely interested in a person.
Yes.
Can I add my spin to that?
Sure.
I have 3 questions that I teach my mentees to ask.
Okay.
Right? I don't know if it works. I always say step number 1, ask them, what is a goal that you set for yourself in 2021? Then number 2 is, why do you set that goal? Ask a few series of why, like you said, to uncover that person's value. And then ask the person, what's the biggest roadblock you're facing right now that's preventing you from achieving that goal? And then you go do whatever it takes to help them solve that problem. What do you think? Do you think that would be a good way to add value to the person?
I think it depends on how you put it across. I think the questions are great. It's just a matter how you put it across. Because I think Eric, you're very seasoned, right? So it sounds very smooth. But if someone who's trying this for the first time, perhaps it may sound a little bit deliberate. And I think when you sound too deliberate,
It's too
scripted,
prepared.
yeah, and the person don't feel genuine.
How
right?
do you make it like part of the conversation? How do you make it like smooth, flowy?
I would say having a structure is great, but you still have to understand, what works best for that situation itself, right? So if that person is very chatty and stuff, just let them talk, right? If the person is very quiet, maybe you start having a bit of a conversation, a bit of a stories to connect further, and try to find a common topic, a baseline. I think the baseline is very important. right? Common interest, right? So when you talk about, mirroring techniques, one of the key things is then how do you mirror common experience and interest?
Common experience, common interest.
Yes.
And it's easy to find that through LinkedIn these days, or even
That's one.
Instagram, because if I follow you enough, I roughly know what you care about. Like, okay, let's assume, that I'm trying to connect with Sam for the first time. Number one, Sam posts a lot of Instagram stories about his son. Right? So therefore, if I am a father, then we would definitely talk about fatherhood. How do we balance between that, right? Number two, I know you're a huge fan of storytelling, which is also the reason why I brought you to the studio. So therefore, a second piece of topic we can talk about is storytelling, right? And then what you're saying is that in the process of creating common ground, I then figure out what you're working on and how I can be of value to you.
Don't jump straight, in my opinion, right? Because if you jump straight, it comes across as too deliberate. It comes across as too orchestrated in some sense. But just a word of caution as well, right?
Yes.
So let's say you know that, for example, I'm a father, right? I care a lot about my son and stuff. You jump in to talk about fatherhood topic, right? I think that's fine. That's a common topic, for example, assuming you have a son, right? But there was one incident that was a bit more creepy. So the guy, he's like, he claims to be a dadpreneur as well. People like this dadpreneur term, right? Which I put on LinkedIn. He just asked me a few questions like, how are you doing? How many kids do you have? So I just answered one kid and stuff. Do you plan to have a next kid soon and stuff like that? So he started becoming a bit creepy. It's like, I don't know you well enough. Why are you digging into my personal life so much, right? So I think when you connect with an individual, also you also have to sense a little bit about the comfort level and move slowly, not too aggressively, right? So even if you want to talk about, let's say, fatherhood, don't move into something too private unless the person start talking about certain things that are very private, because everyone has different comfort level. The last thing you want is to intrude in the private the privacy level that's uncomfortable. After spending so much time building that trust, the trust can be broken quite immediately, actually, like as well.
So how do we make sure that we don't end up asking questions?
I think the first meeting, play safe. I always say play safe in the first meeting, right? Just focus on understanding the person better. Try to create a bit of likability in terms of the common topics.
So be genuinely interested.
And try to add value, share a bit of your experience that you have, that you've gone through, just to build that initial connection, right? And then once you have that sense, how deep can you go? And then second meeting will be a better time to go a little bit deeper and to push a little bit further in terms of the boundaries itself. First meeting, typically I would say, keep it a bit safer, a bit cordial, but be sincere, definitely. I think that's important.
Got it. Oh my God, I love this. This is powerful. I mean, we will do a summary later on. It's our tradition to kind of do a podcast summary. But I just want to say I learned two very big things from you. Number one is I've learned how to tell my brand story using Visa. Right, that's one. Number two, I also know how to tell a success story. Now, you might frame it as employer branding, but I see it as a success story, which actually we can use as a salesperson. We can tell client success stories, right? Or if I'm a company, I can tell my employee success story. Right. So wait for the summary at the end. Okay. Final question for you. Actually, two more questions. Okay. Could you tell me that what is one thing that you did right that led you to be highly sought after, in your field of corporate branding? Because it's very clear. I read your LinkedIn recommendations. I mean, the big brands do go out for you and they like you, right? And you're not a big consultancy firm, right? We're local and we support local, yes. But I'm just wondering, what's your secret sauce? Like, what do you think is that one thing you did that make you highly sought after in the corporate branding field?
To me, it's consistency, actually.
Tell me more about that.
Building a brand is not overnight. I think a lot of people try to just have that overnight fireworks, just hoping that certain videos, certain content goes viral and that's about it. Or I just hope that someone sees this, I get engaged for a project, and that's overnight success, which social media typically tells such stories, or the impression is as such, right? Behind the scenes, there's a lot of consistency, a lot of hard work. I mean, I post pretty much every single day. I try to engage people on a daily basis, and that's hard work over the past 4+ years.
Yeah, and how do you create love for that? Because not all of us probably love creating content. Not all of us love connecting with people. Yet we know that these are two very essential core skills if we want to be successful in the long run. How can we nurture the love for these two things?
It really ties back, at least for me, right? It ties back to why am I doing this? Right?
Mission.
Yeah, so I don't constantly remind myself, but when I get tired, I think about why do I even start doing this in the first place?
Why do you want to do all these things?
For me, I believe a lot in creating the Asian voice, a lot in the people enablement space, right? That there's a lot more potential that people can do, whether it's a HR space or non-HR space. And I really see that things that I'm doing constantly has impact on people's life, right? Developing people in different ways, whether it's through mentorship, through programs that we run, through that coaching, consulting. Seeing that gives me a lot of energy, and I constantly remind myself, no matter how tired or how frustrated I may be certain clients even at times, right? These are things that keeps me going, and constantly by sharing all these messages, there are people out there looking forward to this content, this inspiration event, on day-to-day basis. So that's what keeps me going to some extent.
I love that. So knowing your why. Another follow-up question, right? Today we talk about communicating our individual brand, but don't forget, a lot of entrepreneurs, right? We also have companies, and we need to communicate our company brand. So wouldn't that be double work? Because I need to communicate my brand on LinkedIn with my face and my name, and then I'm also the CEO of a company, which means I need to communicate my company brand. How do we balance this two?
So like I said at the beginning, right, your personal brand, company brand is actually closely knitted, closely tied together. So think about this, right? You think about companies like Virgin, you think about Richard Branson.
Yes.
You think about Amazon, you think about Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
You think about, let's say, Alibaba, I think about Jack Ma, for example, right? And all these are big companies. There are many individuals there, there are many executives, but you think about this so-called talent magnets, essentially, right? That attracts talent, that attracts all the attention. So essentially, as a CEO of a company, your brand becomes a lot more important because you're like the face of the company to some extent, right? If you're able to build a strong brand where people believe in you, people get inspired, it helps to grow the company brand because there's association there.
But does the company brand need to create its own set of content as well?
I would say yes. So how I see this is this, right? When I first started out, I was thinking, which route should I go? Company brand, personal brand.
Exactly.
Right? That's a typical dilemma.
Typical question.
Right?
Yeah.
So I started building both first. But then I realized that personal brand was going up a lot faster. Right? So that's why I started taking a backseat for the company brand and use my personal brand to promote my company brand.
And it's okay for a person to promote different companies. Like I represent different companies.
Yep.
So how do I be able to sell different companies?
In different contexts.
Got it. So different stories that I share, I would drive attention to the different projects I'm working on, the different companies I'm working on.
But then I think one important thing is then think of what ties all these brands together, right? So for example, I have People Mentality, which is consulting, right? Stories of Asia, which is a storytelling incubator, like a media company. StoryBuddy is a tech company. But essentially, all things that add up is about storytelling, is about enabling people. So that's the common topic that I always talk about, and different shapes and form, different contexts, essentially.
I love that. Wow, thank you so much. This is really powerful stuff. And I know that you are launching a new tech company, right? You alluded to that just now, StoryBuddy. Could you please tell everyone listening what this whole StoryBuddy is?
So essentially, this arrived from a pain point, right? Where I felt that SOA, we wanted to help more people tell their stories, but there's only a limit how much we can do it, right? I can't go to every corner of the world to interview every single one and things like that. But what if we have a tool that can enable people to tell their stories more effectively? Because typically we realize in the market that people don't tell stories because of three reasons, right? One is because they don't have time. One is because they don't have inspiration, they don't know where to start. The other is then I have all the ideas in the world, but I don't know how to put in proper structure. So we created StoryBuddy, an AI-powered friend essentially to help you tell your stories more effectively through different modes itself, so that different walks of life, different people, even non-native English speakers can start telling stories in different shapes and forms.
So how does it work? Like let's say I want to tell a story about myself.
So
and
there are different modes within the platform itself. One is then you can just have one keyword. Let's say I talk about sales. I want an inspirational quote. I just click the button. There'll be inspirational quotes coming up from there.
Gosh!
And you can use it to start a content, a story already.
Yes,
that's one way.
That's one.
The other way is then inspiration, right? We have a persona mode where basically you shape your own persona. For example, a salesperson. I'm highly passionate. I want to talk about, let's say, promoting the importance of work-life balance with, let's say, family, for example, right? So I generate that as an objective, and then a paragraph will come out. And then you can use that as a way to continue creating a piece of content from there. So that's another one.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay, well, I sense that there are probably a lot of different other features, but the whole idea is to help us tell good stories.
And make it very easy for you.
Consistently, right, and effectively. When is it going to be out?
It will be out in August, so by the time you listen to this, it's probably out already. So
all
check it out.
And we'll definitely put the link in the show notes, and we'll definitely go check it out. I just want to say thank you so much,
Thank you.
for not just giving us the big idea, because we all know stories are powerful, but for really actually giving us the flesh, the meat of how to tell a good story as a company, how to tell a good story as an individual. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right.
You.
Hope
Thanks,
to see you again. SAM, Slim Asian Man.
Yep. Going a bit not so slim, but let's keep it up. Yeah,
let's keep it up. High five, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My biggest takeaway from Sam is that facts tell, story sells. And I really love how Sam explained the distinction between corporate storytelling and individual storytelling. Specifically, if you're going to be telling a story about your company or your products, then try to approach it through a success story. So he mentioned about this thing called a story gap, where you need to first introduce a problem that your company can solve or your product can solve, and also share the positive outcome, of what the product can do, and then share with us the entire journey of how that product can solve this problem. So I thought that would be really powerful if you're a salesperson. Instead of trying to sell your product features and benefits, why not show us how your product or service has helped someone achieve a certain positive outcome and solve a certain problem? And when you do that, you don't sound salesy, and yet you sound extremely engaging, and you evoke the emotions you need to drive a sale. If you are an individual building your personal brand, he talks a lot about trust. That if people don't trust you, they will never want to meet you. And if they don't meet you, you will never have a chance to get a business opportunity. And the way to do that is to start consistently communicating who you are and what you stand for. And he used a very powerful framework called VISA as a way, to introduce yourself. So V stands for values, I stands for interest, S stands for strengths, A stands for aspiration, and then also A again stands the action plan. So you could use stories and everyday examples and experiences and analogies to be able to communicate those aspects of yourself. And when you do that, you will attract your tribe who connect with you, and that's how you build trust and business opportunities. So, you know what? I recommend you to rewatch this video, because there's going to be so much that you will learn when you listen to it the second and third time. So my name is Eric. We produce interviews like this every week on YouTube. If you like content like this, I will highly recommend you to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'll see you at our next video.